Protests against an attempted coup by El Salvador's president as a court rules Bukele's move unconstitutional. The British government goes ahead and deports 20 people to Jamaica despite a court injunction. And Sudan agrees to hand over the former President Omar al-Bashir to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Doris Folo in Quito, and this is From the South. We begin in El Salvador, where the head of the parliament has accused President Nayib Bukele of an attempted coup. That's after soldiers occupied the assembly as Bukele demanded lawmakers approve a loan to boost security. Bukele called an extraordinary weekend session of parliament to ask it to approve a $109 million loan to equip the military and police to fight against violent gangs. The loan has pitted the executive against lawmakers in a country with one of the world's highest murder rates. In response to the troops, the Speaker of Parliament indefinitely suspended Monday's plenary session.
The governing board and the political commission have met to analyze the situation and take action on this attempted coup on the legislative body. It is not possible that 28 years after the peace agreements, we have members of our armed forces invading the legislative body with weapons of war.
Groups of protesters gathered in San Salvador on Monday night to condemn the use of troops by President Bukele. They called him a fascist and demanded that the Supreme Court take action.
To democratically elected President Nayib Bukele, we demand that you rectify your behavior so that it complies with the mechanisms that guarantee the rule of law, which has cost this country so much. To the Supreme Court of Justice, that you rule as soon as possible to guarantee the rule of law.
El Salvador's Constitutional Court also ruled against Sunday's occupation of Parliament by soldiers and police. It said that President Bukele's demand for an extraordinary session of the Legislative Assembly was unconstitutional. Our correspondent Ernesto Avalos has the latest from San Salvador.
On Monday, the Constitutional Court accepted a request from lawyers to declare unconstitutional the President's demand for an extraordinary session of the Legislative Assembly to approve his request for a $109 million loan. The Assembly then decided to hold a session without the pressure from President Bukele. The session,
despite a court of appeal issuing an emergency judgment against it. On Monday night, the court restricted the removal of the 56 men and women unless they were satisfied they had access to an attorney. Now, since last month, the detainees were prevented from contacting their lawyers due to problems with the O2 phone network at their detention centers. Many of the individuals scheduled to be deported have been in the UK since they were children, reigniting Windrush protests. So yesterday we were joined by human rights activist Lee Jasper from the Black Lawyers for Justice in the UK, and he's with us again to discuss this latest development. Lee, how are you?
I'm well, how are you?
I'm okay. Now, a court of appeal held an emergency out-of-hours hearing on Monday night and ruled that the deportation flight to Jamaica be halted, and still 20 people were deported anyway. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, clearly, this is a government not committed to the rule of law. There were people on that flight who had not had due access to legal advice. And there were people, I would have thought, that had the judicial process been followed, would not find themselves on that flight. But we have to give thanks insofar as we were able to get the 50 reduced to a number of 17. And we will continue to fight for those who have been deported, seeking to further explore what legal options are available to them in Jamaica and hopefully get them restored. We've still got a fight on our hands because although we managed to get quite a number of deportees off the plane, that's only a temporary reprieve, giving them access to their legal advice. So we still have to fight judicial reviews on those individual cases. But the protests are growing strong, and we're hopeful about the legal outcome of our challenges.
I mean, definitely a bittersweet occasion. Now, based on your knowledge, were any of the deportees victims of the Windrush migration scandal, or were any of them some of the people who would have come to England as children?
No, absolutely. And I think that their parents came here. They were denied opportunity and access to get their British citizenship sorted out by virtue of the Windrush scandal. And therefore, the government then deems those children to be foreign nationals. That's an absolutely bizarre, hypocritical, and frankly illegal perspective from the British government. And yet it's one in which they entirely persists a means of executing what has become a sort of culture of racism that infects British immigration policy from its genesis to application.
And clearly the outrage and support from the 170 MPs did nothing to stop the government's action. And they've reiterated that these men and women committed murders and rapes or sold Class A drugs. But we've heard several stories that are contrary to that. So how do you respond to the government's sentiments?
Well, that's just pure propaganda on behalf of this government. There are some involved in very serious offences, but the vast majority are not. They are an individual whose last offence was for a small drug offence 17 years ago. There are people on that plane having been deported with their last criminal offence was 23 years ago. Why is it that this government has taken all of that time to determine their status? They've not proven to be a threat to the United Kingdom. They've not committed any further offences. And therefore, for all intents and purposes, having arrived here with their Windrush parents, they are indeed British citizens. And whilst we may have lost the legal technical argument, I think we've conclusively proved that we won the moral argument amongst the wider community and society that has been absolutely outraged of what they've seen as a consequence. Can I just remind people that these deportees had a court order preventing their deportation. And this government took those detainees from their detention centres at the dead of night. They were shackled from ankle to waist, and they were forced, resisted, and were beaten badly onto coaches, transported over 300 miles away from London to a lonely airport, and sat on that bus knowing that the court had ruled in their favour. And this government did all of that to those detainees and their families while it sought an appeal against that court ruling, which it ultimately lost. And those buses had to turn back around and take those detainees back to London. That is cruel, vicious, vindictive punishment beyond belief.
Sounds a lot like slavery. Would you describe the immigration policy that we are now seeing in the UK to that which we have seen and spoken about a lot in the media in the United States?
I think so. I think Trump and Boris Johnson share a lot in common. And one of them is this almost ideological commitment to identify people of colour, be they Nigerians, be they people from Jamaica, and to double down on them as being unpopular minorities so that they can prove their ideological credentials to people in the country who would support an apartheid-like culture. We've got plenty of white Commonwealth individuals here in the United Kingdom, from New Zealand, from Australia, even South Africans, former South Africans, who have not been subject to this wholesale targeting and deportation. And yet we are asked to believe that this government is operating on the basis of the rule of law. No, that is a lie. What we're seeing is a government that is infected with the culture of racism that is brutally targeting people of Caribbean and African descent.
Well, Lee, we are out of time, but I would like to thank you so much for joining us and providing your insight on the situation that is taking place in the UK.
And thank you.
Lee Jasper from the Black Lawyers for Justice in the United Kingdom. So coming up, Sudan's Omar al-Bashir will be facing charges at the International Criminal Court. Stay with us for details.
Acompañamos a los pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus luchas.
Somos esa ventana que se abre para visibilizarlos entre fronteras.
Thursday, only on FtS.
Welcome back. Sudan's government has agreed to hand over former President Omar al-Bashir to the International Criminal Court. He faces charges of genocide, war crimes and crimes against humanity over the conflict that broke out in the country's Darfur region in 2003 following a rebellion by non-Arab rebels. Government forces and mainly Arab militia mobilized to suppress the revolt were accused of widespread atrocities, including mass killings of civilians and rape. Now, according to the United Nations, the conflict killed more than 300,000 people. This Tuesday marks the 30th anniversary of South African anti-apartheid icon Nelson Mandela's release from prison after nearly 3 decades behind bars for fighting against the inhumane apartheid system. A series of events will take place across the country to commemorate the day that changed the course of history. President Cyril Ramaphosa has delivered a speech from the balcony of the Cape Town City Hall, where Mandela had addressed thousands of supporters in 1990 after attaining his freedom.
The day Madiba was released was the day we all knew that apartheid was dead and it was finished and clear. The apartheid genie had definitely gone out of the bottle and could not be put back again.
Well, South Africa's Economic Freedom Fighters Party has condemned the appointment of President Cyril Ramaphosa as chairperson of the African Union. A statement by the party said the decision is a missed opportunity to appoint a progressive leader who would lead the continent towards economic independence and unity. It notes that Ramaphosa's failure to protect African migrants from xenophobic attacks is evidence of his lack of commitment towards African unity. The EFF also accused Ramaphosa of being a loyal servant of imperialist forces looting Africa's resources. Kenyans have bid farewell to their former head of state Daniel Arap Moi, who died on February 4th, aged 95. About 30,000 people attended the public memorial service at a stadium in the capital, Nairobi. The service was also attended by several African heads of state and government. President Uhuru Kenyatta, who presided over the memorial, called Moi a champion of Pan-Africanism. Opposition leader Raila Odinga, jailed for several years under Moi's government, described the late leader as a great fighter who made some mistakes.
In this solemn moment, let us all take comfort in the fact that President Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi leaves behind a towering legacy of good that will transcend the generations.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has visited a community and a hospital in Beijing to inspect the effectiveness of measures implemented to halt the outbreak of the novel coronavirus as the death toll rises to 1,017 in mainland China. President Xi met with frontline medical staff at a hospital treating infected patients, calling the situation in Hubei province, the virus epicenter, still very grave. He urged more decisive measures to contain the spread of the epidemic that has sickened over 42,000 people so far. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has said COVID-19 will be the new official name for the new coronavirus. WHO Chief Tedros Ghebreyesus said the name had been chosen to avoid references to a specific geographical location or group of people in order to avoid stigmatization.
We now have a name for the disease, and it is COVID-19, and I will spell it COVID-19. CO stands for corona, as you know. VI stands for virus, D for disease, so COVID.
The Caribbean is also chiming in on this epidemic, as Guyana has said it will most likely deny entry to 16 Chinese doctors who traveled home for the Lunar New Year festival as a travel ban remains in place. The Caribbean country noted, however, that should anyone be granted entry, they will be screened and subject to an isolation period. The Chinese ambassador to Guyana has criticized the move, saying a travel ban is not the answer, adding that his nation is sparing no effort to control the situation. There are over 100 persons who traveled to China from Guyana and have been affected by the travel ban. And while fear-mongering surrounding the novel coronavirus continues, the H1N1 influenza has already claimed at least 40 lives in Trinidad and Tobago for the 2019-2020 flu season. The Ministry of Health said the number of suspected cases for 2020 thus far stands at 158, while the cumulative number of vaccines administered to the public is over 87,000. Last year's suspected influenza cases stood at 3,854. The influenza virus is serious and generally more severe than the common cold. The flu vaccine is available at no cost at all health centers. Moving to Latin America, the right wing in Bolivia is doing all it can to prevent the country's biggest party, the Movement Towards Socialism, from returning to power in the May elections. It is trying to get the electoral authorities to rule Evo Morales and other leading candidates ineligible.
Bolivia's right is not satisfied with forcing the mass government to resign through the coup on November the 10th last year. It wants to wipe these leaders off the political map. And the most symbolic case is former President Evo Morales' candidacy for the Senate.
Those who have gone or tried to go to seek asylum and support in other countries are automatically excluded.
To stand for a seat in the Senate is outrageous. I am not going to prejudge what the Electoral Court will decide. We hope it will rule him ineligible. If it doesn't, we have time and we'll see what other legal mechanism we can use.
The main mechanism now for politically annihilating the mass leaders is to get them ruled ineligible for the elections on May the 3rd, using the argument that they do not meet the 3- or 5-year residency requirements stipulated in the law.
By Wednesday, we will complete the documentation demanded. However, it seems strange to us that they have also demanded this of our candidate, Luis Arce, because we have checked and all the required documents were presented.
The Supreme Electoral Court has not yet approved the nomination of Evo Morales and 700 other candidates, and it's given them until midweek to deliver the documents it says are missing.
The Supreme Electoral Court will begin to analyze on Thursday the additional documentation delivered by the candidates not yet approved. This work will be completed on Monday when we will inform their parties.
However, it has been made clear that if these candidates meet the requirements and are approved, the door will remain open until a few days before the May the 3rd elections for others to challenge their nominations.
Candidates who are approved by the Electoral Court can still be challenged if some other party or political organization thinks there is reason to do so.
This is one way for the right, which is standing 7 candidates in these presidential elections, to remove the movement for socialism from the political scene. But through the de facto government, it is also pursuing legal cases against several of the candidates of the MAS, the party led by the former President Evo Morales.
Speaking of elections, we have more stories coming up, including a look at the Democratic primary in New Hampshire. So stay with us.
The Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines the mass media influence promoted by imperialism. Get access to the analysis of the socio-economic and political life of the whole South America on our screen and platform in English. A critical place committed to the truth to determine the major events that transform the world today. Mondays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. In the United States, Democrats are voting in the party's New Hampshire primaries that could see a reduction in the current number of presidential candidates. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders and former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, Pete Buttigieg, are among the 11 facing off for the pole position. This vote comes 8 days after Iowa kicked off the nomination process that saw Sanders and Buttigieg declare themselves the victors following issues in the counting process.
This turnout tells me why we're going to win here in New Hampshire, why we're going to win the Democratic nomination, and why we are going to defeat the most dangerous president in the modern history of America, Donald Trump. And the reason that we are going to win is the American people, no matter what their political views may be, are sick and tired of a president who is a pathological liar, who is running a corrupt administration, who is a bully and a vindictive person, who is a racist, a sexist, a xenophobe, a homophobe, and a religious bigot. And those are his nice qualities.
Well, final results from Ireland's general election have confirmed the unprecedented success of the nationalist party Sinn Féin. Although Fianna Fáil got 1 seat more in Parliament, Sinn Féin won the largest number of votes and still aims to form a government.
I may well be the next Taoiseach, yes. Sinn Féin won the election, we won the popular vote. We've recorded a historic victory for our party. This election has been a drawing of a line in the sand. It's been a very clear message to the old two of the political establishment that their days of domination are over.
Protesters have gathered outside the parliament in Lebanon in an attempt to block a vote of confidence in the new government. The demonstrators scuffled with police, who responded with tear gas and water cannons. Some lawmakers slept inside the parliament building as the protesters were out from early morning to try to prevent the session from taking place. They say they have no confidence in any of the political elite.
We are here because we are trying to get rid of the leaders of corruption, the leaders of war, the leaders of destruction, the leaders who ruined the country, who stole the country, who looted the country's wealth and left the people poor and humiliated.
Hundreds of thousands of Iranians are taking part in mass gatherings to mark the 41st anniversary of the Islamic 1979 revolution. Rallies have taken place in more than 5,000 locations across the country. Addressing crowds that converged in Tehran's Freedom Square, President Hassan Rouhani said the revolution remains strong and that attempts by the U.S. and Israeli governments to destroy it will fail. This year's rallies coincided with the 40th day memorial for top General Qasem Soleimani, who was assassinated in a U.S. drone strike in Baghdad in early January.
America can't do a damn thing through the sanctions. Even if we die from poverty and hunger, we will not compromise with America. No way. I'm telling this to officials, foreigners, and America.
The founder of South African multi-Grammy award-winning music group Ladysmith Black Mambazo, Joseph Shabalala, has died at age 78. According to local media reports, Shabalala died at a hospital in the capital, Pretoria. She is well known for his leadership of the choral group founded in 1964 that shot to world acclaim, collaborating with musicians such as Paul Simon, Stevie Wonder, and Dolly Parton. The group's unique traditional Zulu style of cappella helped to make them one of South Africa's most recognized performers on the world stage.
Homeless, moonlight sleeping on a midnight lake. We homeless, we homeless, we moonlight sleeping on a midnight lake. And we are homeless, we are homeless, we moonlight sleeping on a midnight lake. And we are homeless.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesourenglish.net. For our viewers in Africa, remember you can find us on Starsat Channel 461 in South Africa and Channel 539 in Nigeria. And join us on social media for Telesur English. I'm Doris Polo. Thank you for watching.
We are present at every event where our nations are staring. We believe in a new global vision, united in every broadcasting. We keep expanding our horizons and working on a closer and better communication. Now, in Grenada, Telesur, the new source from South America and the Caribbean. Discover the cultural diversity that defines a continent. The place where art and tradition are part of the same nucleus. Artistic expressions, values, passion, and more. Real life. Fridays, only on Telesur.